Alright, we're ready to begin the reassembly of our Sellita watch with the AS1187 movement. And the first thing we need to do is reassemble the mainspring barrel. I have a new mainspring for this watch because, as you remember from the first video, the original mainspring in it was badly set and was ruined, so we took it out. And I've got a brand new mainspring here for it. And the mainspring comes in a metal ring that holds it in a compressed state so that we can push it into the mainspring barrel without having to use a mainspring winder. So this makes it much more convenient. If you were to reuse the old mainspring, if it were still in good condition, you would need a mainspring winder to wind it back into the barrel. What we're going to do is lay the mainspring on top of the mainspring barrel. And the mainspring is compressed a little bit smaller than the barrel, so you should be able to line it up on top of it. And once I get it lined up there, I'll set it back on the table. Now, it's important when you do this that the mainspring be in the correct orientation. And if you put the mainspring on upside down, it will be coiling in the wrong direction, and then the watch will not wind. So it has to have the coil of the spring in the center, because in the center it comes into a tight coil, which is the part that grips around the mainspring arbor when we stick it in there. That has to be coiling in the correct direction. And so when you take one of these apart, make sure that you take note of what direction the mainspring was oriented, so that when you put the new mainspring in, you do it correctly. And this is the correct orientation for this one. So what we're going to do, now that we've got it lined up over the mainspring barrel, is we're simply going to use our fingers and push it down into the mainspring barrel. And you can kind of hear it snapping in there as I did this. I don't have all of it pushed in all the way. It looks like some of the coils are still stuck on the edges of the washer. So what I'm going to have to do is use a screwdriver and kind of encourage the rest of it to go in there, as it should. Okay, I've got it in now, and I still want to make sure that I've got all the entire thing pushed down evenly into the barrel so we can get the lid to fit on correctly. And I think it's all good now. The next thing we need to do is insert the barrel arbor into it. I'm going to use a pen vise. What I've done is I've put the barrel arbor into the pen vice's jaws, and the barrel arbor has two ends. One end has a hole in it, as you can see here, for a screw, which will hold the ratchet wheel on top of it when we put everything together. The other end does not have a hole. The hole that has the screw needs to be the one that sticks out of the pen vise. Now, once you've got that secured in the pen vise, we'll pick up the barrel itself, and we will insert the barrel arbor into the center of the coil of the mainspring. And then we just need to maneuver the barrel arbor around inside that coil until we get it inserted fully into the coil and it catches. And then you make sure that the bottom of the arbor sticks out through the bottom of the barrel, like that. And you can test to make sure that it's winding right by turning the arbor using the pen vise to make sure that it catches the mainspring. And you can see it has here because it keeps wanting to unwind when I let go of the pen vise. So once we've got it in there correctly, we can loosen the pen vise because we want to get the pen vise off of the barrel arbor. And there we can see it all put together the way it should be. So now that we have that assembled, we can then put the lid on it. To put the lid on, I use this mainspring barrel closer tool. The way this works is it's got a lid and a base, and you're supposed to put the mainspring barrel in it with the arbor sticking through the hole in the center. And then you lay the lid on top of it, and you put this on top and push it down to snap the lid on. But I've never really had much luck making it work correctly. So what I've been doing with it instead is just using this as a base for pushing it on with my fingers. So I put the lid back on, lay the mainspring barrel on it with the arbor down in the hole in the lid, and then I place the lid of the barrel on top of it. This is the lid of the mainspring barrel. Now the lid has two sides. One side has a lip that you can see around the hole in the center and around the outside edge of it. The other side is perfectly flat. The flat side goes up, the lip side goes down. So now I'll lay the barrel lid on top with the arbor sticking through the hole. There we go. Okay, now I need to make sure that the barrel arbor is sticking through that hole in the center of the lid of the barrel closing tool. And then what I'm going to do is just use my fingers to push straight down on the barrel lid. And you'll hear it snap into place. I need to check and make sure that it's actually down all the way around it. If you look at the lid should be totally flush with the top of the barrel. If it sticks up on any sides, oh, and it does there on this side, we can see that a little bit. We need to push it down more on that side. It is still sticking up slightly on this side. Dang. Still sticking up on this side. There, oh, there we go. Now I hear it snapping into place. Now let's turn it around and look at it and see. And yeah, everything looks even now. So this is the way it should be. So now that we have it together, we can insert the barrel into the base plate of the movement. I've got the movement base plate inserted into a movement holder. And now the first thing I'm going to do before I put the barrel in is put a little drop of HP 1300. That's our thicker oil used for slow moving parts on this little hole right here in the center. That is where the barrel arbor goes into. And I'm going to do that off camera because I need to use a loop to look at it to make sure that I do it precisely enough. And it's hard for me to see under my camera for that. But basically I'm going to use one of the little thin oilers here to wipe a little drop of oil around the edges of that hole, the inside edges of the hole. And then we'll drop the barrel in on top of that. Alright, I've got that done. And when I say a tiny drop of oil, I mean a tiny drop. Like the drop that I picked up on the oiler was too big, so I actually dripped a little bit of it off back into the oil pot to make a smaller drop, because you want just a teeny amount of oil. You don't want enough that's going to leak out anywhere else in the movement and contaminate things. Now we're going to put this in. The side of the barrel that we put the lid on is actually the bottom of the barrel, so it gets flipped over before we drop it in. And that barrel has some lint on it that I'm going to clean off. So we're going to go ahead and drop it in, just like that. And then the next thing we need to do is put on the barrel bridge. And we're going to lubricate the barrel bridge the same way that we lubricated the base plate. The barrel bridge has a little hole in the center of it too that the top of the barrel arbor goes through. And I want to put a little tiny drop of that oil around the inside of that hole, just like I did on the movement base plate. And it's going to be the HP 1300 again. And then we'll drop this on top of the movement and screw it down. This is the stem retaining screw, and it goes in with the screw threads going down into the base plate. And the hole that it goes into is this one right here next to the spot where the stem goes in. And it just drops right in like that. It doesn't have to be screwed into the base plate because the screw threads on the bottom of it don't attach it to the base plate. They actually go into the detent lever, which will attach to the other side of the movement. So for right now, we need to just drop that in there, and then we're going to put the barrel bridge back in place. Trying to get this onto the barrel arbor and the stem retaining screw at the same time while I'm looking at this on a camera screen. It's kind of hard because I'm used to doing it through an eye loop. There we go. I was having a hard time looking at that on the camera screen, so I had to kind of pull it closer to my eyes just to get everything lined up. But now it's all lined up correctly. And we can see here the barrel arbor goes into the barrel bridge, and then the stem retaining screw is right there next to where the stem goes in. So the next thing we need to do is put on the 3 screws that hold it in place. I've got all 3 screws installed on the barrel bridge, so it's tightened down. The next thing we need to do is install the center wheel and then the center wheel bridge. And the center wheel is the one that has the fat hollow tube for a spindle. And that tube goes straight down into the base plate, into that hole right there next to the barrel. There we go. Now it's in place. Now the next thing we need to do is put the center wheel bridge on. The center wheel bridge goes over the top of the center wheel and holds it in place. Get the center wheel bridge installed and the 2 screws that hold it in place screwed down. There's one right here and one right over here. The next thing we need to do is put on the cannon pinion, which goes on the other side of the movement. So we're going to take the movement out of the holder, and the cannon pinion slips over the bottom of the center wheel spindle, which is sticking out through the bottom of the base plate there, right in the center. And I'm going to sit that directly on my tabletop here because we need to have a hard surface underneath the top spindle of the center wheel when we push on the cannon pinion so that it doesn't damage the bearing when we push down on it. And here's our cannon pinion. There's a gear at the bottom and a tube that sticks out of the top of it. The tube goes upwards and the gear toward the bottom. And we just slip it over the top of the center wheel spindle. There we go. That went on easily now since I could see what I was doing. In order to get it to hold on, this is held on by friction. So it needs to be pushed down until it snaps into place. And the way you do that is you put your tweezers around the tube and down against the gear at the bottom of the cannon pinion. And you just gently, don't push real hard or real fast. You don't want to shove it on there, but just gently push downward until it snaps into place. There we go, you heard the snap. So now it's in place. Next we need to install the ratchet wheel. Now the ratchet wheel has a square hole in the middle of it, and that goes over the square top of the barrel arbor. And so we need to make sure that when we put this on here that we align the square on the wheel with the square on the arbor. And actually I got it pretty close there. Usually I have a hard time doing this under the camera. I'll probably knock it out of place when I try to do this. Oh, perfect. Okay, now we're ready to put the screw in. I've got the ratchet wheel screw in. When you're tightening it down, be aware that when you turn the screw to tighten it, the ratchet wheel and the barrel arbor are going to want to turn too. So you need to put your finger over the ratchet wheel like this and hold it in place while you're tightening it down, and then it's possible then to tighten it without the barrel turning. Actually, I think I'm going to do, the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to put in the drivetrain gears, because we had to put the ratchet wheel in first because the way that this is set up, some of the gears are stacked on top of each other and you have to put them in a specific order. And so the center wheel goes in first, then the center wheel bridge goes on top of that, and then the ratchet wheel goes on next, and you can see it sits over the top of the center wheel. And then the fourth wheel goes on next, and it goes over the top of the ratchet wheel and the center wheel bridge. And the fourth wheel actually goes into the hole in the middle of the spindle for the center wheel. That way the fourth wheel and center wheel turn concentrically with each other, because the fourth wheel carries the second hand and the center wheel carries the cannon pinion, which is what holds the minute hand. So the way that these go in is the fourth wheel goes here, the third wheel goes in this hole here, and then the escape wheel goes into a hole down underneath the center wheel bridge. And so that's the next thing we're going to do. Before we can install the train bridge and the train wheels, we need to put in the lower cap jewels. So I've turned the movement over with the dial side up. One cap jewel goes here, and this is for the escape wheel, and the other goes over here, and that is for the third wheel. The lower third wheel pivot has a capped jewel. The upper third wheel jewel is not capped. It's in the train bridge. I don't know why they did it this way, because that's not something you usually see in a watch movement. The escape wheel, however, has a capped lower jewel here and a capped upper jewel. There's a cap jewel that goes onto the train bridge, and we'll install that after we put the train bridge on, and I'll show you that. So here's our jewels. Well, here's one of them. This is the jewel for the third wheel, and I've got it sitting here with the flat side up. The jewel has a flat side and a curved domed side. It's like got a curvature to it, like a dome. The flat side is what you want to put the oil onto, and so I've got it facing upward here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my thin oilers to put a tiny drop of Mobius 9010. That's our light oil that's used for fast-moving parts. I'm going to put that directly in the center of the jewel there, just enough to cover about 50% of that jewel. And I can't do that under the camera lens and see what I'm doing very well, so I'm going to have to do it off camera looking through an eye loop. But after we do that, then I'll show you the process for putting it onto the base plate. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick the jewel up, flip it over so that the side that we oiled faces down, and drop it onto the base plate into the spot where the jewel goes. And that oil will move. Some of it will move from that cap jewel onto the lower jewel that's installed in the base plate too, so that both jewels will get oiled at the same time by doing this. I have both of them installed now. Each one is held in place by a tiny little screw that you had to put in after you drop the cap jewel in. The next thing I'm going to do, even though we're not quite ready for the balance wheel, I'm going to go ahead and install the lower balance jewels as well. Now the lower balance jewels go in to this housing right here, and this is an Incabloc system, so there's this little spring here that has to be opened up, and then we drop in the jewels and close the spring. So let's go ahead and open up the spring first. The Incabloc spring has a hinge on one end of it. There's the hinge side, and then the other side has two little tines that go into grooves on the side of the housing here, so it has to be kind of popped into those. So what we need to do now is open it. And the procedure for opening the Incabloc spring is simply to take a pair of fine pointed tweezers and push them into the little semicircular indentations on the side of the spring. And you want to do this real gently so that you don't break the spring, because if you break it, it's a real pain to change the spring in this. You can install a new spring, and I have some spare springs, but they're not easy to install, so I would rather not break it. So what I want to do is push in here real gently until the tine at the end pops out of its housing. There we go. Oh, actually, both of them popped out at the same time. Usually you have to push on one side and then do the other, because they usually come out one at a time. So we got a little bit lucky here. Now we need to open it up, and we're going to do that just by slipping the tweezers in there and opening it up with a hinge. And I'm having trouble doing that under this camera, so I'm going to do that off camera. I've got the hinge open. You need to be real careful. Look at it through a strong eye loop while you're doing this. And because when you're pulling the hinge open, sometimes it'll bind up, and if you force it, you'll break the hinge. These things are super delicate. I can't emphasize how thin and delicate this metal is on these hinges. So you want to be very careful not to break that. Now the next thing we need to do is drop in the lower jewel. And I've got the jewels right here. The jewel is a two-part system. We have the lower jewel is in a metal housing ring called the chaton, and then the cap jewel is here. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop in the chaton with the lower jewel into the movement first, and then the cap jewel has to be lubricated with some oil, and then once we have it oiled, we'll drop it in on top of the chaton, and then we'll close the spring. And the easiest way to pick these up, these jewels are hard to pick up with tweezers. The chaton on this is irregularly shaped. It's narrower at the bottom than it is at the top, and it makes it very difficult to pick up with tweezers without it springing off the tweezers and getting lost. And you don't want to lose one of those. They're hard to find. They're hard to find if it drops on the floor somewhere, and if you can't find it, they're hard to get another one like it because of the age of this thing. Spare parts are hard to come by. So what we're going to use is a jewel picker. This is a jewel picker. It's a device that's sold to people who are into jewelry making, and it has a kind of a sticky plastic end, and when you touch something with that plastic end, a small object like a jewel, it sticks to it, and you can pick it up and move it and place it on things. But it doesn't leave any kind of residue or anything. It doesn't have an adhesive. It's just a sort of a tacky plastic. You want to pick up the chaton by the top side. The top is the wide side and the bottom is the narrow side of the chaton. So we're going to pick it up here by touching it with the jewel picker. You can see I got it picked up now. Bring in the movement. And I'll simply drop it in there. Kind of rotate the jewel picker to kind of pop it off of it. There we go, it's in. Kind of shake it down there to get it laying in there flat. Now the next thing we're going to do is we need to lubricate the cap jewel. Here's the Incabloc cap jewel. Now the cap jewel has a flat side and a domed, curved side, just like the other cap jewels we just put on. You want to have this positioned with the flat side facing down on the watchmaker's paper like I have here. And we're going to grab the back of it, the dome side, with the jewel picker and pick it up with the jewel picker. And I'm going to hold it in the jewel picker while I put the drop of oil on it, and then use the jewel picker to drop it down onto the chaton in the movement base plate. And what we're going to do for the oil for this is we're going to take the real thin oiler and Mobius 9010 oil and put a little drop of it, just enough to cover about 50% of it. And I have a hard time doing that on the camera because I can't see well enough through the camera's screen to do this accurately. So I'm going to have to do it off camera using an eye loop. So that's why I'm explaining the process. You want to take a tiny drop of Mobius 9010, the thin oil, put it on the flat side of the jewel, while the curved side of the jewel is held by the jewel picker, and then you can drop it onto the chaton in the base plate. All right, I've got the cap jewel in place now. The next thing we need to do is we need to shut the spring and latch it in place. And so we'll just hinge it back down carefully. And then we need to push the two little tines into their retaining slots. And we do these one at a time. Okay, one side's in. Now we need to do the other. Since I'm right-handed, I'm going to turn this around so I can get it with my right hand too. Ah, there we go. Now they're both in. So that part's done. We'll do the upper cap jewel the same way using the same procedure. It goes into the balance cock, and we'll do that. I'll do that when I'm ready to put the balance wheel on. For right now, we need to turn the movement base plate back over so I can install the drive wheels and the escape wheel. The drivetrain wheels have to go in a specific order. The third wheel goes in first, and it goes into this hole right here. The jewel that it goes into is down below that hole at the bottom in the base plate. After we put in the third wheel, then we put in the fourth wheel. And the fourth wheel goes down through the hollow center of the spindle for the center wheel. So we're going to do the third wheel and then the fourth wheel, and then we'll put in the escape wheel. And the escape wheel goes into a jewel way down underneath here. And then once we've got those three in, then we can put on the drivetrain bridge. Now the escape wheel has a specific lubrication requirement too. We have to put a special lubricant on the teeth of the escape wheel. It's the only wheel, the only gear in a watch movement that you ever put any lubricant on the teeth. You never put lubricant on the teeth of any wheel in a watch except the escape wheel. Everything else, the lubricant only goes on the pivots, which is the ends of the spindles that go into the jewels. But the escape wheel has to have the jewels lubricated and has to have the teeth of the wheel lubricated as well, and the reason for that is that the pallet fork slides against the ends of those teeth on the escape wheel, and so that needs to be lubricated. And I'll show how that's done in just a moment after we get the other two wheels on. I'm going to go ahead and put the third wheel and the fourth wheel in place now. This is our third wheel, and it goes with the long spindle down and the short spindle up into that hole. There, like that. Now the next wheel it goes in is going to be the fourth wheel, which, as I said, goes into the little hole there in the hollow spindle for the center wheel. And here's our fourth wheel. The fourth wheel has a much longer spindle on the bottom than on the top, and that long part in the bottom is what goes into the hole. The second hand rides on the end of this spindle. There we go. I thought I wasn't going to get it in the hole without doing it off camera, but I did get it in. So the next thing we need to do is the escape wheel. Here's the escape wheel, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the oiler and put a very, very minute amount of oil on the ends of the teeth of the escape wheel, not the top or the bottom, but the very tips, the ends. And we're not going to put it on every single tooth. We're going to put it on every fifth tooth. And because the amount that's needed on each tooth is so small, it's almost impossible to put that much on by hand. So we're going to put it on like every fifth tooth. And then when the movement starts running, the oil will be distributed by being picked up by the pallet fork around to all the other teeth. So after a time of running, all the teeth will be properly lubricated by doing it with this method. And I can't really show putting the oil onto these teeth under the camera. The escape wheel teeth are just too small for me to see well on the camera screen, so I'm going to have to do this with a strong eye loop. But I wanted to explain what was being done with it. After I put the lubricant on it, then I can install it into the base plate. And the lubricant that we use for this is the Mobius 9415. It's a special lubricant just for the escape wheel. It's the only thing you use this on. It looks like a thick grease when you see it laying in when you see it in its container. But when you put it on, and once the watch starts moving, it actually liquefies then and turns into a thin oil that provides the lubrication needed. And I think that the thickness when it's not being rubbed against helps keep it in place so that it doesn't fall off of the escape wheel teeth as the escape wheel is spinning. So that's what I'm going to do now is add that lubricant to the escape wheel teeth, and then I will install this escape wheel into the movement base plate. All the wheels are now installed, including the escape wheel, which is kind of a pain to install because you have to slip it underneath that bridge and underneath the other wheels, but they're all installed, so it's time to put on the train bridge. We got the train bridge installed. It's held in place by the 3 screws, one here, and one over here. Now let's go ahead and test and make sure that the gear train works correctly. So I'm going to turn the barrel a little bit. And you can see it's a tiny amount of movement of the barrel sends the gears into rapid motion, including the escape wheel, which really spins fast. It's doing just what it should, so we're all set on that. I need to clean a little bit of lint off of it. I see a few pieces of lint that need to be picked up. Use a piece of Rodica to do that. The next thing we need to do is lubricate the jewels here. This jewel and this jewel need to be lubricated, and then this has a cap jewel that goes on it, and we'll lubricate the cap jewel and put it on here, and that'll lubricate the lower jewel as well. And all these jewels are going to be lubricated with the Mobius 9010 light oil. This is for the fourth wheel. This is for the third wheel, and then that's for the escape wheel. Using my thinnest oiler, I'm going to just put a little tiny little drop of oil in each of these jewels. I've installed the upper escape cap jewel here, and I've done it the same way I did the lower cap jewels. This jewel has, the top of it has a bit of a domed shape to it, just like the other ones, and the bottom part of it is flat. I put a tiny drop of lubricant on the flat side, just enough to cover about 50% of it, and then turned it over and dropped it into the movement with the flat side down, and then put this tiny little retaining screw in, and that screw is very hard to put in because it's so small. So the gear train is fully assembled now. The next thing we need to do is put in the crown wheel, but I just realized I forgot to put the click spring in, and it goes underneath the ratchet wheel, so I took the ratchet wheel back off. I managed to slide it out from under the third wheel there. So I'm going to put that in next, and then we're going to put the ratchet wheel back on and put the crown wheel and the click on. The spring for the click is a little tiny wire spring that looks like a sort of a cane shape, and this is it right here. And it needs to go into this little slot right here in that orientation. The little tip of it goes in that little hole right there, and then the rest slides back into this into the area where the click goes. And I can't put that in there under the camera and see what I'm doing, because I'm going to have to put a finger over it while I'm nudging it into place with screwdrivers to keep it from flying out and popping across the room. So I'm going to do that off camera. Alright, the click spring is in. You can see how it's oriented there. Now I'm going to try to reinstall the ratchet wheel on top of it again. And it's going to be tricky to slide that in there underneath the third wheel. That's what we're going to have to do here. There we go. Now I need to get it oriented so that the square hole in it orients with the square on the top of the barrel arbor. Alright, that worked out better than I thought it was going to. I thought I was going to have to take the train bridge back off to get that done. I was able to get out the ratchet wheel and then put the click spring back in and put the ratchet wheel back on without disassembling the drivetrain, thankfully. So our next thing we're going to do is install the crown wheel, which goes right here. Now the crown wheel has a washer that goes around this post first, and then the crown wheel goes over the washer. So here's our crown wheel washer. And then the crown wheel goes over that. You make sure it meshes with the gears on with the gear teeth on the ratchet wheel. There we go. Okay, now we need to put in the screw. And the screw for the ratchet wheel, as we mentioned when we disassembled this, it's a left-handed screw, so it goes in the opposite direction that a normal screw does. Normally you would turn a screw clockwise to tighten it, but this screw is going to be turned counterclockwise to tighten it, which is the opposite of a normal screw. So if you try to tighten it the normal way, it will never tighten up. This is especially important to remember when you're disassembling a movement, though, because if you turn it the wrong way when you're disassembling it, when it's already screwed in, you'll actually tighten it even more, and if you keep pushing, you can strip the threads, so that's an important thing to remember with these. Alright, that's in now. Next thing we need to do is add the pallet fork and pallet bridge, and they go down here in the escapement well. And the pallet fork goes into that jewel way back there, and then the pallet bridge then goes on top of that to hold it in place. And the pallet bridge is held in with a single screw that goes in to this hole right here, and then these two posts on the opposite sides of the hole help align it. I've got the pallet fork in place, and there's a couple of things to notice on this. Note how the long stem of the pallet fork goes between the two banking pins. It's important that be aligned in there. It has to be between the two pins. And then the spindles on the pallet fork, one of them is longer than the other. The one on the bottom is the long one, the one on the top is the short one. So you want to make sure you put it in the correct side up, or else it won't function properly. So the longer part of the staff goes down and the shorter part of the staff sticks up. Now we're going to stick the pallet bridge over the top of that. Alright, I got the pallet bridge installed, and it was pretty easy to do because it has the two alignment pins that you stick it over, and then the screw in the middle that holds it in place. You do want to be sure that the jewel does go directly over the pivot on the top of the balance fork before you push it down all the way so that you don't damage that pivot, but it usually lines up pretty easily because of the alignment pins. As long as the pallet fork is sitting level, it isn't sitting crooked in its lower jewel, you should be okay. The next thing we need to do is install the balance cock and balance wheel. Alright, everything on the powertrain and the escapement is put together except for adding the balance wheel and balance cock. I've already assembled the upper Incabloc jewels on the balance cock off camera, since the procedure for doing that is exactly the same as for the lower balance jewels that we already did. So let's go ahead and put the balance wheel on the movement and see if it works then. Once we put it on, it should come to life. There it is, it's running. Now I need to put in the retaining screw for the balance cock, and the escapement will be all done then. This needs to run for at least 24 hours before I can regulate it, to allow all the lubricants to work their way in, and to allow the special escapement oil we put on the ends of the teeth of the escape wheel to distribute all the way around it. So what we're going to do next, after I put the balance cock screw in, is we can start working on assembling the rest of the dial side of the movement. And on that side of the movement, we have to put in the keyless works, which is the mechanism that changes between winding mode and time setting mode when you pull the stem in and out, and also the motion works, which is the set of gears that synchronize the hour hand and minute hand, so that they will work in proper synchronicity with each other. So we can work on that while we're waiting for the escapement to run its 24-hour warm-up period before we can regulate it. Retaining screws in place, we're ready to move on. The next thing to do will be to flip the movement over in the movement holder so that we have the dial side up so we can start working on the other side. I couldn't resist the temptation to put it on the Timegrapher without waiting the 24 hours, just to see how much of an improvement I got after taking it apart, cleaning it, reassembling it, and relubricating it. This is actually pretty darn good readings. We're seeing readings that are real close to 0 seconds per day. Amplitude's 239 degrees. I wish that were higher, but I can live with that. Just went up to 241. Beat error is 0.9 milliseconds. Anything lower than 1 millisecond won't affect timing accuracy, so we can leave that alone. Beat error is a real pain to change on these older watches because you have to rotate the hairspring collet, and to do that you have to take the balance cock and balance wheel back off the movement, and there's a big risk of damaging the hairspring when you do that. So I think I'm just going to leave that. The beat error I'm not going to mess with. I'll go ahead and wait another 24 hours before we do the final regulation and see where it is after that, because I'm sure it's going to change a little bit after it's had some time to run. But right now I'm getting readings that are really, really nice. So the first part of the keyless works I'm going to install is the detent lever, and that lever has a big knob sticking down on one end and a smaller pen on the other side. The pen side goes up, and the side with the post on it goes down into the trough where the stem goes through, because this is the part that holds the stem in place. And it sits down over the stem retaining screw here. I don't have it quite accurately in place, but I will try to nudge it back here. Once I get that properly set on the screw, I'm going to have to hold the movement in my hand with my finger over the detent lever to hold it in place while I tighten the stem retaining screw from the other side of the movement. And that's hard to show on camera, so I'm going to do that off camera. But I'm going to tighten that up enough that the detent lever won't fall off before I put the other parts of the keyless works in. I've got the detent lever screwed on. Now, you don't want to screw it down real tight because you need to be able to move it back and forth. It needs to be able to rotate around the screw, and if you tighten it down too tight, you can't do that. But you need it engaged on the screw thread so it doesn't fall off. The next thing we're going to put in is the winding pinion, and that's this little gear right here. This has two sides. One side, which you can see here, is smooth, and the other side has a pattern that looks like little triangles or little ramps carved into it. Those are what interact with the clutch, so that when the clutch moves against the winding pinion, turning the stem will wind the watch. So this side needs to face back toward the center of the movement, and the smooth side needs to face toward the outside of the movement when we drop it in. And it gets dropped into this little slot right here. Just like that. Now the next thing we're going to put in is the clutch. And the clutch also has two sides. One side of the clutch has that same pattern of little ramps on it that the winding pinion has, and that's the side that's going to face toward the winding pinion. The other side has what looks like gear teeth. The gear teeth face toward the inside of the movement, and the clutch face faces toward the outside of the movement. And we're going to, before we drop that in there, we need to put some grease on the clutch face part. So I'm going to put a very thin layer of grease on the clutch face, and the grease I'm going to use is Mobius 9504. Here's the clutch with the grease applied, so I'm going to go ahead and drop it into the movement with the side that has the grease on it facing toward the outside of the movement, facing toward the winding pinion. Okay, I've got it dropped in. Now I need to put the stem in next, and the stem needs to have a little bit of grease put on it. And if you look at the stem here, there's a section of the stem that is square. That's the part you want to put some grease on. It's a thin layer of grease on it. That's the part that slides, that the clutch slides on. And I think I need to get some more grease on my oiler. I've got the stem grease now. I'm going to go ahead and try to insert it. I may need to loosen the detent lever a little more before I can insert it, but we'll see how it works out here. And we need that to go through the clutch and the winding pinion. So the next thing we're going to do is put in, I need to put this back in a movement holder, and then we're going to put in the yoke and the yoke spring. I have the stem installed, and you can see how the detent lever goes up over the stem. There's that knob on the bottom of the detent lever that goes into this little groove that's in the stem there that you can see right here. And when you pull the stem in and out, it moves the detent lever. Now the detent lever is going to move against something called the yoke, which is what moves the clutch back and forth. So we're going to put the yoke in next. The yoke goes over this post right here and extends across here and into a groove that's cut into the edge right there. So in order to install this correctly, we need to put the tip in first into the groove. And we need to make sure that the long thin tip there also goes into the edge of the clutch, which it looks like it's fit in there okay right now. Now we need to move this over onto the post. There we go. Now this goes through the little groove on the clutch so that when the detent lever moves, it pushes the yoke, which then moves the clutch forward and backwards. When it's backwards or back here toward the edge of the movement, it's for winding. When it pushes forward into the center of the movement, it will engage the intermediate wheel that we're going to put here later for setting the time. Now the next thing we need to put in there is the yoke spring. And the yoke spring starts here, goes around this post, and then along the back of the yoke. And it's shaped like a cane, just like the spring that we installed on the other side of the movement for the click, except that this is a heavier, stronger spring. And I have a difficult time installing these under the camera because they want to fly away if you don't hold on to them carefully. I'm going to have to put a finger over it while I'm maneuvering it into place using screwdriver tips. So I'll show you the completed result when we get done with it. And there it is. That actually went in a lot easier than I usually do. I got lucky this time. But you can see how the spring starts here, curves around the post, and goes along the back of the yoke. Now the next thing we're going to install is we're going to install the intermediate wheel, and we're going to install the minute wheel. The intermediate wheel goes over this little post here, and the minute wheel goes over this post right here. This is the intermediate wheel. One side of it has rounded off edges, and the other side has squared off edges on the gear teeth. The rounded side needs to go down, and that's the way I'm putting it on now. Next we'll drop in the minute wheel. There we go. Now the minute wheel teeth need to mesh with the intermediate wheel and the cannon pinion, so that's on there correctly. Now the next thing we need to put on is the set bridge. And the set bridge is a flat metal plate that goes across most of the keyless works. It holds the yoke spring, the intermediate wheel, and the minute wheel all in place, keeps them from falling off. And it's held in place by 2 screws. One of the screws goes in to a hole in the post that the yoke spring goes around, and the other hole is the post that the intermediate wheel goes around. That's where the 2 screws go that hold it in place. And there it is. The set bridge also has another function. You can see the set bridge itself is this big metal plate, but it also has a long extension coming off of it here with a little hand on the end that grips on this pin on the top of the detent lever. This is the detent spring. When you pull the stem out, it snaps into place, or you push it back in, it snaps into place for the winding mode or time setting mode. This spring and the detent lever are the 2 things that give you that where it snaps into position and stays there until you push it again. And I can demonstrate that here how it works. You can see right now it's in winding mode. If I pull it out into time setting mode and turn it, you can see how it then turns the gears where the intermediate wheel turns, and the minute wheel turns, and the cannon pinion turns. And the next thing we need to add on to this is the hour wheel. Now the hour wheel goes over the cannon pinion, and it's what carries the hour hand. There we go. And we can see that it also connects with the minute wheel. And you can see how all those turn then together. And that's how you set the time. The hands are going to go on, the hands will go on the cannon pinion, the hour wheel, and the little thin pin sticking up through the middle there, which is the 4th wheel. So the hour hand goes on this post, the brass colored post. The cannon pinion, which sticks up a little bit higher than that, will carry the minute hand, and then the second hand goes on the post from the 4th wheel. The last thing to add then is the dial washer. And the dial washer is what holds the hour wheel down. Pressure from the dial on the dial washer pushes down on the hour wheel and keeps it from falling off. Now the only thing left to do now is add the dial and the hands and then put it back in the case. And I'm going to do those in the next video because the next video is going to be somewhat long too. I'm going to put the dial and hands back on, do the final regulation of the movement, and I'm going to take the crystal out of the case because the crystal is very scratched up and I've got a new one for it. I'm going to change the crystal and I'm going to clean the case before I put it all back together. So that will be in the next video.